Have you ever heard of Louis Agassiz? Because as you can see here, let me just zoom in a little bit, right? This is Louis Agassiz, again, Geological Sketches, 1866, this version of it. And we're gonna go right to, basically, it's right in the beginning almost. And it says here, contents, page 1, volume 1, America, the Old World. America, the Old World. Again, firstborn among the continents. First born among the continents. Though so much later in culture and civilization than some more recent birth, America, so far as her physical history is concerned, has been falsely denominated the New World. Again, has been falsely denominated the New World. This is not the New World. This is the true Old World. Hers was the first dry land lifted out of the waters. Hers, the first shore washed by the ocean that enveloped all the earth beside. And while Europe, listen to this, while Europe was represented only by islands rising here and there above the sea, America already stretched in an unbroken line of land from Nova Scotia to the far west. Again, America, the Old World. Hawaii, yes, family. Entire cities are being found in the Guatemalan jungle as we speak. All right, as you see here, look at this. It's vast. This is all on the jungle. This is the area right here, what you call it the Yucatan and the border of Guatemala, the Petén region, they call it in Guatemala. All this unexplored area, which is all this forest and jungle. You see the cypress trees. You see all kinds of different vegetation. You see tropical as well. And under all this jungle, in this area of the world, you see where they got the highlighted parts. That's the only parts where they've done the LiDAR scanning. That's the only places. They still haven't explored the other parts. As this is what they're finding. You see what's under here. You see all these structures. All right, Guatemala, roads, highways connecting all these cities under this vast jungle. You see pyramids, monuments. Look how they play with their technology. They're so happy. All right, you see what they're finding under these jungles. 60,000 structures, approximately. All right, millions and millions of people were in this region of the world. All right.
I want to show you some things that I don't think you even knew existed. It goes against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans. And I want you to know this part of our history because people erased it, and we'll get to that later on in the program. Erased it intentionally, Graham. Erased it intentionally. That's an important part of it. America's history didn't begin with Christopher Columbus came over. There were ancient cities with advanced architectures all across North America. Did you know that? Hundreds of years before Columbus came. You always think, oh, and the Indians, they didn't scar the land. No, not true. These were cities as large as any in the world at the time. London or Rome, they were metropolises. Archaeologists say they have found evidence of 200,000 actual cities of mound-like structures all across North America that were here long before Columbus. But we don't know anything about them. Why? Why?
For more than 50 years, evidence of humans in America much older than 13,400 years ago was simply dismissed, and anybody who attempted to go that way would not get research funding and would be ostracized by their colleagues and literally have their lives ruined. And this is most unfortunate, and it's not how science should proceed, because we now know that human beings have been in the Americas for tens of thousands of years before 13,400 years ago. In fact, the latest evidence puts them back more than 130,000 years in the Americas. And what that says to me is, if they were saying before that humans didn't come until 13,400 years ago and nobody should look, nobody should dig deeper, now we know they were there 130,000 years ago. That's more than 100,000 years of the American story that has not been told entirely because of the dogmatism of archaeology. And now reluctantly they're having to accept, all of the institutions are accepting, well, we're sorry, we got it wrong. But it's not just a matter of getting it wrong. It's a grave responsibility to be the profession that interprets the prehistory of humanity to the modern world. And it's a betrayal of that responsibility to be so dogmatic and to refuse to consider any possibility which doesn't fit with one's preconceived notions. And, you know, the net result is that we're left with 100,000 years of North American prehistory, which has been completely unstudied, and they're only now beginning to study it. And the evidence that's coming out, both in North America and South America, is absolutely stunning.
The Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael Kurimeo. In part one of the Hidden History of the Human Race, we look closely at the vast amount of controversial evidence that contradicts current ideas about human evolution. We recount in detail how this evidence has been systematically suppressed, ignored, or forgotten, even though it is qualitatively and quantitatively equivalent to the evidence favoring currently accepted views on human origins. When we speak of suppression of evidence, we are not referring to scientific conspirators carrying out a satanic plot to deceive the public. Instead, we are talking about an ongoing social process of knowledge filtration that appears quite innocuous but has a substantial cumulative effect. Certain categories of evidence simply disappear from view, in our opinion, unjustifiably. This pattern of data suppression has been going on for a long time. In 1880, J.D. Whitney, the state geologist of California, published a lengthy review of advanced stone tools found in California gold mines. The implements, including spear points and stone mortars and pestles, were found deep in mine shafts, underneath thick, undisturbed layers of lava, in formations ranging from 9 million to over 55 million years old.
Findings of implements and fossils of early man in pre-glacial rock layers were cited by scientists of the last century 1800s, not only in the gold-bearing layers of California, but around the world. But before leaving the United States for other fossil sites, it would be good to recall the so-called Nampa image. All right, you guys, this is very interesting, this part right here, the Nampa image. I know a lot of you probably already know, have heard about it. One of those out-of-place objects that they want to just say it's fake, but they can't really prove it. We're going to talk about it. Again, it says the so-called Nampa image found at Nampa, Idaho in 1889. Holmes is a very respected scholar at that time, says reported that this minute clay figure is said to have been brought up by an artesian well sand pumped from late Tertiary or early Quaternary age. Lang's 1893, page 385, more lengthy report says that the image was brought up from an artesian well, which had a lava cap 15 feet thick and about 200 feet of quicksand and clays. This very controversial clay figure, very popular amongst conspiracy theorists. So it says here, the Nampa figurine remains a controversial artifact. We're looking at the, again, Nampa clay figure. It says here, Lane's detailed account of the findings of the Nampa image relates how the ancient land surface, now covered over by more than 200 feet of sands, clays, and lava, correspond to the California gravels in geologic age. The The small clay figurine was encrusted with grains of iron oxide like the clay balls found in the sand, which seems to bear conclusive evidence of its great antiquity. The entire 11th chapter of Lane's book is on the subject of tertiary man, so if you doubting it, look up Lane's book. That's a famous scholar. Look it up. Real science. This ain't pseudo. They just can't admit to it, but they won't say it's fake. Just before we continue, I got a little video here. It's fair use for your caboose, fair use. You know, this is for education only. We're just trying to build and learn here for commentary and criticism. All right, so no one gave us no copyright because this is fair use. All right, we're talking about the Nampa figurine.
Well, onto a news story today. A tiny figurine found in Nampa has for many years sparked a whole lot of controversy. This is pretty interesting. Is it one of the area's most interesting archaeological discoveries, as some people claim? Or is it one of the biggest hoaxes in Idaho history? Well, I dug into the mystery behind what's become known as the Nampa image. It's July of 1889. Several men drill for water in what at that time was the very small town of Nampa. Reports say they were drilling down about 320 feet when this tiny clay figurine surfaced. It's the crude figure of a woman, only about 1.5 inches long, with what appears to be one leg broken off.
It's really fragile. It's really small. Nothing like that's ever been found that deep anywhere in North America, let alone in Idaho.
The figure, which is now known as the Nampa image, is housed here at the Idaho Historical Museum. You can see it actually if you just call ahead and make a special request. But where did it come from? Some say Native Americans made it thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, but we may never know for sure.
The scientific community of the time spent a lot of time arguing and debating what it was, and no conclusions were ever come to.
And even today, experts have no real proof of its age.
We assume it was made sometime in 1889. When the guys made it. Somebody made it. It's not ancient in any way, but there's no way to date it. It's made out of clay and sand, and you can't get radiocarbon dates or anything like that with it.
The Nampa image is so small that if you test it, it's going to have to be destroyed. And so that's something we don't want to do because it's a record of the past, and we're really interested in keeping it in the collection.
The so-called discovery of this Nampa image made a lot of news back in that day, as word spread that the well drillers had found an object of, quote, considerable antiquity.
And then in a sense, the story kind of got away from them. We don't know why they did it. We don't have any motives for why they would say this or do it. We just don't think it was true at the time.
So the question remains, will we ever know where the Nampa image really came from?
No, we never will.
Sublime.
I mean, we'll never know for sure.
Sublime.
Rachel Garceau, today's Sticks on Your Side.
Back in the book, The Lost History of Ancient America by Frank Joseph. Chapter 22, Georgia's Ancient City of Shells by Gary C. Daniels. 6 hours via driving southeast of Atlanta, 7 miles off the Georgia coast. Archaeologists have unearthed the remains of an ancient walled city predating the construction of Egypt's pyramids on Sapelo Island, known as the Sapelo Shell Ring Complex. It was an urban site constructed about 2017 BC. In 3 districts or neighborhoods, each surrounded by circular walls 20 feet in height and constructed from hundreds of tons of seashells. Some of the earliest pottery ever found in North America was retrieved from the ruined city, which stood in contradiction to local, contemporary Native Americans unfamiliar with agriculture, generally regarded by scholars as fundamental prerequisite for civilization. That these simple tribal inhabitants somehow made the leap from hunting and gathering to civilization in a single bound, producing not only a walled city, but also the new technology of pottery, without benefit of agriculture, seems improbable. More likely, a far more advanced people already in the possession of a high culture arrived on the Georgia coast to organize their massive shell rings, but their identity and motivation for settling in Sapelo are unknown. All right, so they don't know who it is, so how can they tell you who it's not, right? Drop Nation, so they're always going to, again, this Arthur keeps thinking with a, Mesopotamia and the true old world's on the other side. So that's what he tries to relate when he finds all these things here, right? Those are his opinions. But the truth is they did find this ancient seashell
monument city with walls and everything here off the coast of Georgia. At that time, Akkadian summer collapsed in the Middle East and Dead Sea water levels reached their lowest point. In China, the Hongsan culture collapsed. Sediments from Greenland and Iceland show a cold peak about 2200 BC. The population of Finland decreased by a third between 2400 and 2000 BC. In Turkey's Anatolia region, including the site of ancient Troy, more than 350 archaeological sites show evidence of having been burned and deserted by the close of the 22nd century BC. Entire regions suddenly reverted to a nomadic way of life after thousands of years of settled agricultural life. In fact, most locations throughout the ancient Old World that collapsed before 2100 BC evidence unambiguous signs of natural calamities and or rapid abandonment. What happened then that could have caused such widespread devastation? Answers might come from the sky. Dracons ain't playing, huh? Now, going a little ahead because they start talking about space and all that. It says here, when Hernando de Soto first explored Georgia in 1540, he found it occupied by two indigenous peoples, the Timucua. Indians had migrated there from South America, remember? We kind of read that in my navigational videos, as indicated by their linguistic affinities with native Venezuelans. Did Timucua ancestors flee their homeland after it was devastated by a meteor swarm? Argentina's Rio Cuarto impact craters do date the period in question. The Yuchi Indians believe their forefathers arrived in Georgia after the old moon broke and devastated their island homeland in the Bahamas. The abrupt appearance of a shell-ringed city at Georgia's Sapelo Island shortly after these catastrophic events tend to confirm Yuchi oral tradition. So I just wanted to quickly read that. I thought it was interesting. You know, this shell city that we never know about had walls 20 feet high. Come on.
This is the Smithsonian Annual Report, 1882, 1883. This is John Wesley Howell. This is an original copy. John Wesley Howell in 1789. Again, Powell. This is the director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian Institute. He said this: artifacts found prior to Christopher Columbus's arrival would be considered illegitimate by the Smithsonian. Only the savage Indian culture would be observed, and this created the artificial barrier to science. Only the savage.
The book is called Forbidding History by J. Douglas Kenyon. All right. More than a century earlier, following the discovery of gold in California's Table Mountain and the subsequent digging of thousands of feet of mining shafts, miners began to bring up hundreds of stone artifacts and even human fossils, despite their origins and geological strata, documented at 9 to 55 million years in age. California state geologist J.D. Whitney was able to subsequently to authenticate many of the finds and to produce an extensive report. The implications of Whitney's evidence have never been properly answered or explained by the scientific establishment, yet the entire episode has been virtually ignored and references to it have vanished from the textbooks.
And now we know that an enormous area of the world, the whole of the Americas, was completely ignored, and it may in fact have been the center of the origins of civilization. And it may in fact have been the center of the origins of civilization. And it may in fact have been the center of the origins of civilization.
All right, so we're going to get into this book right here. It is called Dead Men's Secrets by Jonathan Gray. Arizona, USA, North Canal, 9 miles, and South Canal, 7 miles at Hohokam, Pueblo Grande, were comparable to some modern canals. These ancient canals, we've been going over that in the newspaper articles, what they were finding and reporting about. Florida, USA, one canal 55 feet wide intersects sand ridges to a depth of 40 feet. North coast of Peru, a 70-mile canal was so efficiently built that it is still in use today. Yucatan, Mexico, a network of 30 canals, some up to 160 feet wide, and 25 man-made large-scale reservoirs, reveal an advanced knowledge of hydraulic engineering. Right? Guatemala, 250 BC, recent radar photography of rain forests led to the astonishing discovery of a sophisticated lattice work comprising at least 11,185 square miles of irrigation canals, which could have supported millions of people. All right, millions of people. And this is what they're finding with their LiDAR technology today, guys, and all the temples. It's just the beginning. They're releasing all the information as they go. They're admitting it'll take them hundreds of years to even go through all these sites. It's changing history. It's rewriting history, proving America's a true old world. Again, millions of people lived along these irrigation canals in Guatemala. We're just talking about a forgotten race in Arizona. And these are some of the canals they're talking about here, these prehistoric irrigation canals, possibly oldest in the world. Touch the hijack here with their dating here, but it's just an example you guys can see. Ancient canals, canals of the Salt River Valley, Arizona Canal, Grand Canal, Crosscut Canal, Western Canal, Consolidated Canal, Eastern Canal, South Canal, Temple Canal, Highland Canal, Old Crosscut Canal, Maricopa Canal. Continuing another articles regarding the same canal, says marvelous skill. These waterways were built with exactness and skill. The largest has been sadly torn to pieces in the last few years by the ranchmen, but it still shows the wonders of its construction. It has an average width of 7 feet. It is 60 miles long, and it terminates in reservoirs a mile long, half-mile wide. Think of the enormous labor constructing such a canal and reservoir with stone implement and of carrying the excavated earth away in wicker baskets. But that is only one of 17 distinct prehistoric irrigation systems in the Gila Valley. The size of these canals gives some idea of the scale of which these people conducted their agricultural operations. They constructed an artificial river to supply the water which their crops required. They grew great quantities of corn, and they also raised beans as well as 2 or 3 varieties of squashes. Professor McGee of the Smithsonian Institution thinks it probable that they kept the guanaco in domestication, and evidences are found which indicate pretty certainly that they had turkeys. One may walk for miles in this region and find every foot of the sandy surface more or less mixed with pieces of broken pottery. The paint is still on them and is not in the least faded, though they have lain exposed for centuries. In the neighborhood of Tempe, an overflow from the Gila at some distant period washed against the ruins until they crumbled and were spread out level with the country. All right, something happened. You see that washed away. Back 10 miles from the Gila River, the ground is higher and was once the site of a city. Portions of the buried city wall by which it was protected are still standing, more than 20 feet in thickness. Inside are the mound-like ruins of the houses, which being less durable have crumbled. The buildings must have been very large, for in some instances the mounds are 300 feet in length by 200 in width and 20 in height. Much of the country is very little higher than the present bed of the Gila, and at one time a branch of that stream must have flowed into a basin which formed natural reservoir. There was a rise of about 10 feet at one point between the basin and the river, and the sandstone formation shows unmistakable signs of having been cut by artificial means, perhaps with the idea of assisting the entrance of the water by enlarging the passage. 5 canals lead out of the basin, all on the south and west, which confirm the belief that it was once a reservoir formed chiefly by nature and used to store water against the periods of drought. We're just talking about a so-called forgotten race or buried cities here. So it's here, 7 buried cities. 7 buried cities? The expedition that worked during the winters of 1896, 97, and 98 under the patronage of Mr. Utum in the neighborhood of Mesa, a little town in the eastern part of Maricopa County, revealed vast possibilities for scientific investigation in these buried communities. The site of the investigation was what is known as the Mesa Grande, or Big Upland, between the two principal rivers in southern Arizona, the Gila and the Salt, whose combined current finds vent in the Rio Colorado at Yuma, one of the 7 buried cities. There is known as Las Acequias. It covers an area nearly 2.5 miles square and probably once had about 25,000 people. Exploration shows that the great artificial canals, all right, here we go again, great artificial canals, which were its arteries of commerce and agriculture, were elaborately terraced. All right, and remember, wherever you got agriculture, you got civilization. So they're talking about these artificial canals. These great artificial canals were elaborately terraced. They didn't just dig some waterway. They had terraces on these canals. Millions of cobblestones were used to retain the canal banks. An army of thousands of men and women must have spent months, perhaps years, in carrying loads of stones and wicker baskets on their backs from the distant places to the banks. The largest canal leading to Las Acequias consisted of a central ditch, 5 feet in width at the bottom and broadening above to 30 feet. It was 14 feet deep. It was 24 miles long. It terminated in a closed reservoir, 1 mile in length by half a mile wide. The construction of such a work nowadays would be no mean engineering enterprise. But the vastness of the undertaking by a little city where only stone implements for digging and wicker baskets for transportation were known is extraordinary, all right? So again, dodge the hijack, you see. Obviously, they had way more advanced technology and tools, most likely. The boat tomb explorations also revealed the interesting manner in which the mysterious race protected its canals against escapage of water therefrom. From water obtained at such physical expense is very precious in any community, ancient or modern. To render the clay beds of the canals impervious, it was first puddled and then, by means of burning brush and wood, gathered in that hot arid region only by the most arduous labor, it was burned to a terracotta consistency. The Batum expedition proved the fact that the prehistoric people used their canals for navigation. The enormous cedar timbers that are yet found in these wonderful towns came from mountains 5,000 feet high and about 70 miles distant. There was no way to get them to the places of their use but by floating them down the rivers and through the canals. The course of the smaller canals may now be traced, centuries after they have been filled with sand and vegetation, by means of small black pebbles placed along the inner banks by the inhabitants. All right, and that's how they are able to see the smaller canals. It keeps going, but we don't have that part. But just another one so you guys can see what they were finding in this area of Arizona.
The Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael Kurimeo. In the early 1950s, Thomas Ely of the Natural Museum of Canada found advanced stone tools in glacial deposits at Cheguanda on Mount Nitoline Island in northern Lake Huron. Geologist John Sanford of Wayne State University argued that the oldest Cheguanda tools were at least 65,000 years old and might be as much as 125,000 years old. For those adhering to standard views of North American prehistory, such ages were unacceptable. Humans supposedly first entered North America from Siberia about 12,000 years ago. Alright, so as you can see, their chronology and their history does not fit with what has been found many times. Alright.
The so-called Amazonian cities.
Yes.
So London around the 16th century, 60,000 population. There were cities there.
There were enormous cities in the Amazon. This is another piece of the new evidence that's overwhelming the old ideas. Because the old idea was that there were no humans in the Amazon until about 1,000 years ago, that the Amazon, although it's a luxuriant rainforest, has poor soils, and that it was impossible for human beings in large numbers to survive there. We now know they did, and the reason we know they did is tragically because of the clearances of the Amazon. So much of the Amazon has been cut down, and in those areas that have been cut down, evidence of enormous cities has emerged. Cities with populations of tens of thousands, bigger than London at the same time. And not only that, but evidence of high science, geometric geoglyphs on the Earth on a scale of hundreds of meters, squares, circles. They even performed the exercise that we attribute to the ancient Greeks of squaring the circle, a very sophisticated geometrical exercise. You can see that done on a scale of hundreds of meters in the Amazon.
Civilization and the Ancient Egyptians by Katanga A. Bongo. The idea that it was Europeans who introduced civilization to Africa is one of the biggest historical myths. In fact, evidence from archaeology, oral history, traditional languages, and cultural practices strongly indicate that it was the South American Indians. Again, the South American Indians who introduced civilization to Africa. Who introduced civilization to Africa? According to this researcher, South American Indians. Some 7,000 years ago. Long before the Greek and Roman civilizations emerged, the South American Indians had introduced civilization to Africa, thereby making Africa the second continent in the world to become civilized. Spurred on by their South American Indian guests, the Africans built great empires that lasted for several thousand years at a time. Contrary to popular myth, in the Western world, the advent of Europeans destroyed civilization in Africa rather than made it. Alright, so as you can see, this researcher is stating what we're correlating about the origins of civilization and where it began.
Back in the book, The Lost History of Ancient America by Frank Joseph. Chapter 9, Drowned Village of the Ancient Copper Miners by Wayne N. May. 3,200 years ago, Upper Michigan's enigmatic copper miners left behind some 5,000 pits and in excess of 1 million stone tools, but no trace of their towns has ever been found until the discovery of a village site 10 fathoms beneath the surface of Wisconsin Lake. Due to the site's untouched, if presently unguarded condition, its exact position is concealed as some measure of protection. The ruins were found in June 2011 by Scott Mitchum. All right, this guy actually has been finding a lot of things. He's come out in a lot of TV shows, ABC, a lot of things, explaining his discoveries, logs, huge logs being cut, he found in lakes and things like that. He's the owner of the Superior Water Log Company operating in Wisconsin, Canada, and Brazil. Mitchum said, "I had never looked in deep water off the island point, but knew the rocky shore gradually sloped down, but previously only covered the first 20 to 30 feet around the island, not in depth. As I got closer, I slowed to an idle and waited until I could see the bottom. I knew I had extra visibility, so I would be able to view greater depths. As the rocky bottom started to appear, something immediately caught my eye, a formation of piled rocks. I got the max, put it on, and dumped my face overboard to see mounds and circles of stone perfectly stacked." All right, here's a picture of it, the grouped rocks right here, as he's saying. "I quickly returned to shore, tied up the boat, and put on my diving suit. The sun was already down, so I didn't have much time. I swam back to where the boat had been hovering earlier and could faintly make out dark structures lining the bottom in every direction, but declining light conditions terminated my dive. The next day, June 23rd, I arrived back at the site around 2:30 in the afternoon. Conditions were windy, with lots of pollen on the water, so visibility was not the greatest. I put on my scuba gear and dove with a camera in hand. As I swam down to the largest mound, I could see a dark, long pile of rocks, its vicinity littered with hammers and other stone tools, including what appeared to be a wood planer made from some sort of marble-like non-local stone. I logged the site via my global positioning system." All right, so here's one example of he's talking about a sunken circle with a small triangular monolith at its center. The same type of three-pointed stones was found inside a Wisconsin earthen mound at Aztlán. All right, Aztlán, a 13th century ceremonial center, less than 200 miles south of Scott Mitchum's underwater find. The significance of these triangle stones is unknown. All right, now imagine, this is at the bottom of Wisconsin Lake. When was this above the water? How long ago was this? Mitchum went on to find what he describes as workbenches used for pounding and grinding. At one of them, 2 tools were left on top, a hammer and a grinder. The surrounding lake bottom was profuse with stone arrowheads, but in awl and fishhook were made of copper. And other fish hooks he found was much bigger, four-sided, and likewise copper, right, metal stuff here. Mitchell's most remarkable encounter was with a mini pyramid, about 4 feet wide and approximately 4 feet high. Listen, because all his dives occurred between depths of approximately 30 and 60 feet, the material he found can be dated back from 4,100 to 3,200 years ago, when water tables in the upper Middle West began to rise from previously lower levels. In other words, the structures and implements he observed were on dry land prior to the 2100 BC, after which they were progressively covered by rising waters. This period tends to affirm their identification with the Great Lakes region, ancient copper barons who were busily engaged in large-scale mining operations just then. All right, and they're talking about, yes, there are ancient mines, people mining. They don't know who did it, and all this was going to Europe and Asia, and all these, you know, what they were getting out of this, it was going all over the world. Because in its present pristine condition, the site is extremely vulnerable to vandalism and theft, it must await the final installation of security systems before its precise location is publicized. Until then, the ancient copper miner's workshop is concealed in a murky darkness that has preserved it for more than 40 centuries. All right, so, all right, when are they going to release this, right? When are they going to protect this? What happened?
Called Forbidding History by J. Douglas Kenyon. The Central American Mystery. What could explain the failure of mainstream science to unravel the origins of Mesoamerica's advanced ancient cultures? Will Hart. The Olmec civilization surprised me the most. I had read about the Maya and knew of the Aztecs, but I was surprised for what I found in Villahermosa. Large stone heads with negroid features and stone stelae carved with depictions of curious ambassadors. The figures clearly were not from any Mexican culture. These artifacts were more than just a fascinating puzzle. They represented a headache for science. They were an anomaly. Who had carved the heads? Who had created the stele? Where did they get those models for these heads and figures? These were questions that arose because of their way scientists had reconstructed the human history of Mesoamerica. Okay, so look what he says. Africans don't fit, nor do the cloaked Caucasian figures carved on the stele. They shouldn't be there. However, they are surely there. All right, so like he says, these are questions that arise because of the way scientists have reconstructed the human history of not only Mesoamerica, but the whole world. Our whole chronology, our whole history, our maps, everything has been flipped around. So people think that a person of copper color or so-called Negro can only come out of Africa. And also that everybody came out of Africa. That's a theory again. All right? So, you know, with that perspective, it's hard. That's why these people are you know, have questions and it's mysteries to them. But this is the true old world. And the
all right, so we're going to get into this book right here. It is called Dead Men's Secrets by Jonathan Gray. What they're going over in this chapter is some ancient maps, right, that show places that they shouldn't have known about in this time. Like, for example, they're going to talk about the Sino map drawn in 1380. It says, see how accurately it outlines the coast of Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Scotland, as well as the exact latitude and longitude of a certain number of islands. Just a minute, Phil, Heron cut in. The chronometer necessary to determine longitude was not invented until 1765. He's right, said Perch. That is why the readings of Columbus were all inaccurate. Nevertheless, the Sino map is most accurate, insisted Corduroy. And notice the topography of Greenland is shown free of glaciers, as it was prior to the Ice Age, all right? No glaciers there. Unknown rivers and mountains, shown on this Sino map, have since been located in probes of the French Polar Expedition of 1947 and 1949. What do you think of that? Silence. So that's one map that they're talking about here. We're going to show the map. And they mention other maps, like the Mercator chart of 1569 that depicts only the Antarctic coast left uncovered by glaciers. How did they know that? And so on and so on. They got a lot of maps they mention here. One of them, very interesting map, a lot of you know about, I've talked about this in one of my very old videos. It's the Piri-Reis chart or map. Now remember, 1513, that's about what? That's only like 20 years later after Columbus. So you're saying they already had mapped the whole coastline of South America and all that in Antarctica? Watch what it's going to tell us. It says, this is the Piri-Reis chart of 1513, he began. After his discovery, Captain Arlington H. Mallory, an American authority on cartography, asked the U.S. Hydrographic Office to examine it. The U.S. Navy, through Commander Larson, subsequently issued this statement. Corduroy took his notes and read to us. All right, so this is what they're saying. The U.S. Navy Hydrographic Office, U.S., okay? They're saying the Hydrographic Office of the Navy has verified an ancient chart. It's called the Piri-Reis map that goes back more than 5,000 years. It's so accurate, only one thing could explain it: a worldwide survey. The Hydrographic Office couldn't believe it either at first. But they not only proved the map genuine, it's been used to correct errors in some present-day maps. Corduroy grew excited. I say, if ever there were a treasure map, this is it. Just crammed with priceless gems. It tells the story of ancient coastlines, as well as the surprising exploits of our ancestors 5,000 years ago. Piri-Reis stated his copy was a composite from 20 ancient maps. So let's explore it. I took a pad and noted the following features. All right, so this is what you can see in this map. South America and Africa in correct relative longitude and latitude. Not only were the Caribbean, Spanish, African, and South American coasts in correct position relative to each other, but even isolated land areas like Cape Verde Islands, the Azores, the Canary Islands, as well as topographies of the interiors, mountains, ranges, peaks, rivers, plateaus, all were accurately positioned by longitude and latitude. The coastline of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica, all right, listen to this. The islands and bays of the depicted coastline are the same as they appear below the Antarctic ice sheet. They had that already mapped, as recently revealed by seismic echo soundings. Pictured in great detail are regions scarcely explored today, including mountain range that remains undiscovered until 1952. Interestingly, the map shows two bays where the modern seismic map showed lands. However, when the experts were asked to check their measurements, they found that the ancient map was correct after all. One thing was crystal clear: either somebody had mapped Antarctica before the ice cap covered the continent, or else the ice-covered continent was mapped with very sophisticated instruments, okay? The isles of Pines, Andros Island, San Salvador, Jamaica, the mouth of the Amazon, and the island of Morajo are all correctly shaped and perfectly located in latitude and longitude. A major error appeared to be Greenland, shown as 3 islands, but during the International Geophysical Year, it was proved that this correctly represented the state of affairs about 3000 BC. That's what it looked like in 3000 BC, according to their science too. Every mountain range in northern Canada and Alaska was recorded on this ancient map, including some ranges which the U.S. Army Map Services did not have on their maps, all right? Even land that they haven't even mapped out, they found on this ancient map. But the U.S. Army has since found them. All right, so here's a little image they got of it. We're going to go right now to check out, a better image of it. All right, so real quick, before we continue, this is the Sino map they're talking about from 1380, right? 1300s. And this is what they were saying, where you can see Greenland with no snow. It has mountains and rivers. You got Islanda, which sounds more like an island than Iceland, right? Up here you got Krola, India. Let me just zoom in real quick on Greenland. Maybe you guys can see it has rivers, mountains, and everything. We got Frisland, that might be Ireland. And it's Scotland, that might be Scotland. I'm not sure, but Norway over here, Switzerland, and some other places here. So think about this now. So if somebody in 1380 was able to draw this detail of all these places, right? If they were capable of map making like this, you think they weren't capable of going to America, which is right next to Greenland? Canada, Newfoundland is right next to it. 1380, all right? This is way before Columbus. So this is why this is important. This is what that author is trying to say about, this shouldn't exist. This shouldn't be mapped out yet in 1380. All right. This is the other map they mentioned before, the Piri Reis map from the 1500s. And usually this is the image you find online. And it's hard to tell, you know, what you're looking at if you don't really know about the map. But found a pretty good image. Wanted to go ahead and show you. You know, this right here in the bottom is literally America. I'm going to show you what I mean. Let me just flip it real quick. So here it is, flipped clockwise. And right here, what you're looking at on this side is Africa. This right here would be the Atlantic. Over here, South America, with some interesting drawings. As you guys can see, we got the chest face mofos right here. Shout out to Nine Spiral. Then we got the dog face mofos, you know. Sinophiles. What's that called? Shout out to Drop. So we got Central America right here. You know, Panama, Costa Rica sticking out. Some of the islands in the Caribbean. All right. So this map right here specifically is not all of it. It's just a piece of a larger map. Let me show you. It's very blurry. I found this image online. It's the same map. We only have this piece over here, but I'm assuming, so you guys can see, it's the same map. This is Africa. And again, as you guys can see, this is South America. Europeans had not mapped the whole of South America like this, or even Antarctica. Yes, in this map, let me show you. South America keeps going and it's attached to Antarctica. Antarctica has animals and everything. You see there's a couple islands down here. You know, they know. In the larger map, not only can you see South America down here, I know again it's a little blurry, but up here you can see Florida. This right here is Florida. All right. This is the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah, so as it says here, dating back to Turkey in 1531, the Piri Reis map is a detailed map of the American and the Atlantic Ocean, possibly even Antarctica, as I was just saying, before it was fully discovered by the Europeans, all right, before all that. It is so detailed and complex that it indicates the cities, civilizations, and maybe even extraterrestrials. All right, they always got to try to put in their alien stuff, right? When the Piri Reis map is redrawn to correct the Eratosthenes error, all existing longitude errors on the map are thereby reduced to almost zero. This can mean only one thing. Do you see? The Greeks who mapped according to Eratosthenes' circumference had before them source maps which had been drawn without that error. The Greeks, listen to that, so the Greeks copied their maps from, you see, all their ancient maps. Remember the Greek mythology, a lot of that stuff, a lot of their gods coming from Atlantis or the Atlantic Ocean. Thus, the geographical knowledge on which the Piri Reis map is based ultimately originated not with the Greeks, but with an earlier people who possessed a more advanced science of map making than even the Greeks. That's brilliant, exclaimed Birch. Couldn't do better myself. What you're saying is that while Greece and Rome were developing new civilizations, the vestiges of an older one, seemingly worldwide in scope, was vanishing. It left these maps which were partly incomprehensible. So later, cartographers altered them. Yes, I can see that. There's just one more thing, said Corduroy. The evidence indicates that what we have here is only part of an original world map. He paused. Oof. Whistled Watchman. So here it was evidence of science in an early epoch, which is considered to have had none. Here were physical fragments of the amazing knowledge of a super culture long vanished. We spread out 6 pieces of the jigsaw, facts which were now apparent concerning those early explorers. So I just want to pause real quick and remind everybody about my ancient seafaring, the ancient navigators coming out of America. You know, the videos I did on that, we were going all over the world. I just want to remind you guys of that. What he's about to list right here is what the ancient Americans possessed. They possessed a knowledge of cartography comparable to our own. They knew the correct shape and size of the earth. They used spherical trigonometry in their mathematical measurements. They utilized ultra-modern methods of projection, exact coordinates. They must have had at their disposal advanced geodetic instruments and trained specialists to use them to measure longitude and latitude. totally lost and not developed in the modern world until the end of the 18th century. Okay? The Inheritors, right? The Inheritors, yeah. Shout out to John Levy, Mind Unveiled, you know, some of the channels pointing out the Inheritors. The picture falling into place was this: almost 5,000 years ago, somebody undertook a survey of the whole planet. The technology at their disposal was very sophisticated. All right? That's basically what they're letting you know. Okay? So we go to chapter 10 of this book. This part of the book is talking about the extent of ancient travel. Done numerous videos, you know, showing that was definitely going on. Ancient people were seafarers going around the world. Columbus was not the first person to come to the Americas, or vice versa. We were going out from here as well. That's right. There was a time when the whole world was known. Travel around it was regular, safe, and profitable. Then most nations lapsed into a subsistence economy. The trade routes, dead and forgotten. Travel to North America. Records of other nations. A Tibetan record of at least 300 BC contains a map of a green land lying far across the Eastern Sea. Example, the Pacific, all right? We're talking about the Americas in a Tibetan map. Says here, Greek navigators spoke of islands in the Western Sea, example, the Atlantic, with a great mainland beyond America. Also, regions where for 30 days on end the sun sets for little more than an hour, and for several months the night is faintly illuminated by the western twilight, the polar regions. And countries where there was a day for 6 months, a night for 6 months, all right? So they were traveling, they knew. Egyptian priests told the Greek Solon that the Atlantic is a real sea, and the surrounding land may be most truly called a continent. Example, America, all right? That's the story of Atlantis. They're telling you straight up. Example, America. All right? Check out our Atlantis videos, my series, Untold Ancient American Truth. If you haven't checked out that series, a lot of different parts, up to like 17 parts, I believe we're on. It says here, according to interpretations of texts by Plato and Diodorus, Phoenicians traded with America around 1000 BC. Who's the Phoenicians? Check out my series, Nations of the World, my Danites video, my top videos, Enoch, Phoenician, Fenian, the sea peoples, the seafarers. Seneca, 1st century, they're talking about a Roman, right? Seneca, a Roman man, speaks of lands between the east coast of Asia and the west coast of Europe. Example, the Americas, right? He was specific. It's in between Asia and Europe. Okay, lands, what? America. He says that one day vast new lands will offer themselves to human view. Strabo, born 60 BC, writes of other inhabited lands and says that a huge continent will be discovered one day. How did he know, huh? We continue right here with another edition of the Ancient American Magazine, Archaeology of the Americas Before Columbus. This is issue number 68 of their collection. One of the articles in this magazine says here, the Anubis Caves. Evidence of Mithraism and Celtic religion in the Oklahoma Panhandle by Carl Lieberger. The Anubis Cave site located in the Oklahoma Panhandle is one of the most significant examples of Old World contact in the New World before Columbus. The epigraphy and mythology inscribed in this group of caves are interwoven into an elaborate Heliolytic apparatus precisely calibrated for equinoxes. Phrases in Celtic, Eshton Ogham, and Libyan script have been interpreted to refer to celebrations at equinox and mention Bel and Grian, Celtic names for the sun god. Remarkably, the Anubis Caves are amongst the best surviving records of the cult of Mithras, an old world religion that spanned the Persian and Roman empires. You hear that? It's the oldest surviving. So where did it originate? Gloria Farley was shown the site in 1978 by a local rancher. She then identified the dog-like figure in one of the caves as the Egyptian jackal god Anubis. Hence the name Anubis Cave, all right? We already know Anubis is from America. That's the Shalot dog. Barry Feld provided translations to some of the inscriptions. Based on this translation, the presence of sun symbols, and the general orientation of the caves, it was predicted that the caves contained an equinox alignment involving light and shadow interplay. Another study reported that such alignments did, in fact, exist at the Anubis site. This work led to a more thorough treatment of the archaeoastronomy, cosmology, and mythology of the site in ancient American inscriptions. The primary source of information used in preparing this article, Scott Monahan of Denver, Colorado, produced a television documentary in 1984 and 1985 entitled History of the Rocks, which documents major features of the Anubis caves. 20 years later, he has updated the story with a new documentary entitled Old News, which includes video documentation and commentary on the Anubis caves.
The date is pulled out of the astronomy, and the astronomy verifies the inscription. Those two things make this unique. We have nothing like it anywhere in the country that I'm aware of.
Grun si mi tuegan, jes amai mi chudele. This is Old Gaelic, and we're guessing at the vowels because the vowels aren't written.
It goes on to translate, the sun is 6 months in the pleasant north, in the gloomy south for the other months.
As the nose pointer shadow crosses the upper stem line on equinox, the forehead of the shadow above aligns with the first of 13 notches inside an eyebrow-like petroglyph.
They draw a line, as they did in the Book of Alimot, a late 14th century manuscript, which explains and translates the oath. As a matter of fact, it shows different types of oath.
This may be some of the most important artifacts found in our time in America. And these are artifacts. They're man-made objects left behind as a result of their cultural activity.
The more we learn, the more we know that in ancient times, people traveled all over the world, and their ships were excellent.
The U.S. Geological Survey came to investigate the crack caves archaeoastronomy. A break in the clouds on the eastern horizon allowed only a brief sunlit observation shortly after sunrise.
You get more sun. I can see the disk. You got a sun disk.
Yes. We never know when we look at one of these sites for sure that what we're seeing was intended, but I think this is a fairly convincing site in terms of the interplay of the sunlight on the petroglyphs.
The light being focused on that area and the petroglyphs being within that area indicates that it most likely was put there with that purpose because of the time of the year and this day being equinox.
I can radiocarbon date the rock varnish, the dark coating that forms on rocks. That provides a calibration, and at the same time with the same sample, I determine the chemistry of it.
Based on the lab results, Dr. Dorn dates the Triogam to 900 BC and the Noble Twins inscription to 1000 BC.
The image of the two suns and the god sitting between the two suns, so the god is sitting at the point of the equinox. That's the position of Mithras.
To understand ourselves, we have to understand history, and we are looking at history here.
All right, you see that was a little promo of the documentary. You see this, a lot of people taking this very seriously. A lot of professors, people who actually study this stuff. Here's the Anubis inscription right here, or hieroglyphic. It says here, Philip M. Leonard has been studying the Anubis caves for over 25 years, along with William McGlone. He has co-authored dozens of papers on the subjects of ancient American inscriptions and petroglyphs. His most recent research on the Anubis cave is a monogram entitled A New World Monument to Mithras, which provides more thorough coverage of the material presented in this article. Leonard and Monahan are among the few researchers continuing to investigate and document the Anubis caves. Continue a little bit more ahead, it says, Mithras is often shown wearing a cape covered with stars. In Anubis cave too, he wears a cape and is positioned between a rising sun and a setting sun. 7 rays emanate from his head. Mithra is the ancient Irish word for the rays of the sun. The 7 rays may also relate to the 7 grades of Mithraic initiation. Each grade had its own set of teachings, represented by a celestial body and symbol, and each of these symbols is found on the Anubis panel. Porphyry, the ancient writer assigned Mithra's proper seat as the line of the equinoxes. Very thorough little article here showing you what's inside the cave and interpreting it. Again, they're telling you Celtic and Mithra religion. And we got Ogham writing as well. It says here figure 7, the 6th-month Ogham. And on the left here, cave 1 constellations. And some more drawings right here. Figure 8 Bell Ogham from Anubis cave 4. So there's many caves, not just one cave here. There are Ogham-like inscriptions in 5 of the Anubis caves. The first to receive attention was the 6th-month Ogham in cave 3. It was originally translated by Fel, as the sun is 6 months in the north, in the south for the other months. Fel's early translation led to the original suggestion by John Polanski that the site was associated with the equinox. And then we got another here in figure 9, Libyan writing on the Anubis panel. All right, so we got Libyan over here too. So a lot of good research here. So it's not just one person saying this is so. There's a lot of people telling you these are old world inscriptions here. This is one of the most famous places in America, the Anubis cave. I wanted to bring this to your awareness in case you weren't aware of it. So you can do some further research if you like on the Anubis cave. Again, these are old world inscriptions found here in Oklahoma. It says here in the conclusion, the equinox alignments at the Anubis caves were not solely established for calendar keeping and calibrations. Instead, they were created as part of a complex monument involving the constellations interwoven into ancient mythology and cosmology. While ruins of several Mithraic temples or Mithraeums survive in Europe, none known to the author display the astronomical details, cosmology, and mythology found at the Anubis caves. Whoever inscribed them in Oklahoma had to know Ogham script, the Celtic language, astronomy, and Mithraic religious symbolisms in use over 1,500 years ago. All right, letting you know America's the true old world.
Yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't, that I fail, that I'll never make it out, yeah. Please tell me all the bad, never good, fill my head full of every single doubt, yeah. Please say any negative thoughts, I pop off when I hear people say I cannot. I get off to the thought of proving everyone wrong, I won't stop to the top, so you better back off and get lost. I'ma stay loud, stay proud, never running out, never heading south. I'll be spreading out, call it word of mouth, can't put me down, I'll be getting loud. You can have your doubts, not what I'm about, have your cloud, it be raining now. I keep making sound, go another round, I'm legend bound, can't stop me now. You don't wanna fuck with me, a slow burn like a disease. Just tell me that I can and I'll show you things that you couldn't believe. Just tell me that I can. 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 Cause I just wanna hear it out your mouth, yeah. Give me fuel, it's a tool that I use to go ahead and run my mouth, yeah. I take shots, I take loss, I make shots, I miss lots. That's how you get big box, you get yachts, you swing lots and pop off a big shot. I ain't done chasing, got big dreams, bigger things, impatient. Who's at the top think they need replacement? Who's at the top think I'm gonna erase them? Face it, I don't give up quick, I don't give up shit, I won't give up this. Cause I know that I want it, know that I'm on it, I'll make it, I promise. You don't wanna fuck with me, a slow burn like a disease. Just tell me that I can and I'll show you things that you couldn't